This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.
Are you hearing voices? Not mine, but the one that's in your head right now. We all hear them. We all hear, that critic that judges us from within, puts a label on us. And of course, you deal with that on the outside as well from time to time. We're going to talk about some of those labels, some of that dialogue that's going on within our minds, and make some changes for the better and for a positive outcome. He counsels people, coaches them, moves their lives forward all the time with this and so much more. He's back with us. Eric John Tanner is on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And yourself?
Really good. Really good. This is a good topic. They all are, but this is one of those that you don't hear people talk about that often. And when you think about it for a moment, we all have stuff we tell ourselves all on a daily basis, if not on an hourly basis.
Right.
And it's pointing us in certain directions, right?
That is true. That is true.
Where do we begin today?
Well, I like to ask some rhetorical questions, just as you're thinking about this, what are the voices of authority you listen to? A rhetorical question is, do you know who you really are and what are you becoming? When it comes to who we listen to, I often like to ask questions, who are the voices of authority in your life? What voices really matter? What voices constrain change in your life, and what voices support and sustain those changes that you desire? And you think about that, sometimes it's what we hear internally as well as some of the feedback we get from others.
Really good point. You just pop something in my mind. I've always heard that phrase, you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But yeah. I always looked at it as your friends, whoever you hang with, right? One of those 5 people technically could be you.
Right.
Right?
I was going to joke. It's just me, myself, and I today. It's like, oh, okay.
There's 3 of the 5 people.
There you go. Right. Questions you're going to ask is, are you the voice of authority in someone else's life? Are you there to influence those around us? And then I think a better one is, are you the ears of authority in someone else's life? I think most of us have already solutions to offer, but very few people listen. If you really think about it, a lot of times people are like, oh, I know how to solve your problems. My problems are too hard, but I know how to solve your problem. So just listen to my advice. And usually advice is free. So it's worth as much as you pay for it, because it's free. And so do I have to accept what they say, or is there a validity to that? And so sometimes I think it's better to maybe be better at listening than to offer a quick, ready solution, and then we can make that reply.
I think I shared with you, I'm in a men's group, and we meet once a week, and we support each other, and we do community service and everything. And the one thing that we do not do, ever, is give advice. And we've even caught each other, hey, you might want to, and another man will say, nope, no advice, it leaves you to problem solve. And then, when you give advice, like we talked, use that word labels before, it's almost as if you're putting an automatic label on somebody when you're giving advice in some regards. You're going in a certain direction, position, as it might be.
Exactly.
Is there a way to process the voice within? When you're in a situation and you're hearing something in your mind, like do this, don't do that. Is there a way to dissect that and deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, really, I think sometimes the way we see ourselves, the way we view ourselves, that internal dialogue, I always imagine a younger version of ourselves, that small inner child, I always like to jokingly say when I'm talking to people, I want you to imagine hopping into a time machine. We'll call it a DeLorean. We jump back in time and you jump out and you're like, hey, Eric, that's me at 10 years old. That's crazy. I want you to imagine looking at this child and saying, you're a good person going through a hard time. You'll get through this. And you're really talking to the inner child, that vulnerable part of ourselves that we don't really let out very much. We may feel like we're an imposter, we're not good enough, we're never going to measure up. And so can we have a little compassion? And I always ask people to, instead of saying what's wrong with me, ask what happened to me. And if we do that, we can have a little more self-compassion and understand, well, how do we get here? What experiences have we had that got us to this point? And can I have a little compassion within ourselves when we make mistakes or when we have that self-criticism?
Love that point. And I wonder now, I think your superpower, you make people think. So now I'm looking at this in a different way. That voice that we're hearing in our mind, is that the inner child?
Yeah, I believe that could be. I mean, we have the voices that we hear. We may hear things for many, many years. What's fascinating, and I'll back up a little bit on a thought experiment here. When it comes to our fears, there's two fears that we're naturally born with: the fear of falling and loud noises. They've done experiments with babies, and they have this natural fear. All other fears are learned. And so if you can say,
I need a moment. I need a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. If you think about it, in that moment, if all my fears that I'm born with are fear of falling and loud noises, I can unlearn my other fears. I can unlearn some of those, insecurities or thoughts that we have within ourselves.
Wow. That is huge. In my opinion, that is huge. I never realized that. I've never heard that before. So to reiterate that, make sure it's clear for all. We are born with the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. Mm-hmm. Everything else we've learned along the way.
Yeah. And so when we learn certain things, I like to think about, how do we choose what we label ourselves or how we identify? And I have a couple stories that I like to share to kind of illustrate the point. Sure. When it comes to how we live up to our labels that we accept on ourselves. I have a story of a lady who grew up hearing she was dumb, stupid, and ugly all through her childhood, very abusive, very traumatic. And for 18 years, she heard that she was dumb, stupid, and ugly. When she became an adult and entered the adult world, she was very self-critical and heard this internal dialogue over and over again, so she could not take feedback from others. She would get a job and then she would say, well, you need to fix this. And then she would try to defend herself and she'd get very angry and really upset and try to defend herself. I'm not stupid. I know what I'm doing. Instead of saying, I'm sorry, I'll fix that, move on. She would, go into her doctor's office demanding medication she needed because she forgot to do a refill. And she yelled at the doctors for not seeing her. Well, she got a letter, go see a new doctor. I don't want to see you. There was several challenges that she had over her lifetime that she wasn't smart. She wasn't dumb. She was smart, but she developed a temper, within herself, and so when she heard that internal dialogue and someone reinforced it by saying he did something wrong, she overemphasized that and had to feel like she had to defend herself, and hearing that internal dialogue, like, no, I'm not dumb. And so, she had to defend herself. And so I'm like, no, she lived up to that label by acting not in a good way, not in a smart way, because she could not get past that. And it took her another 20, 30 years to actually overcome that and to rewrite that internal dialogue, that she didn't have to live up to that title and actually act out in a way that acted like that she wasn't very smart.
Wow. And did that pretty much come from her childhood?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. Wow. From the trauma she received, and she continued to accept that internally after receiving that. And here's a positive way to live up to your label. I had an old college professor years ago, a sociology professor, who he said, let's talk about labels for a minute. He had a coach that came to him and said, hey, I have this football player that's failing and he needs to get a good grade in order to stay on the team. We need him. And he's like, well, I'm not giving him an A. So he said, hey, you know what? I'm going to do something. I'm going to do an experiment with him, have him come to my class. He sat him down, and the first day he said, hey, you know what? This is an A student answer, and asked him. And he's like, okay, whatever. And the next day he came up to him and was asking questions. This is an A student seat you're sitting in. I'm going to ask you. Every day he would call him an A student, and he would change seats all over the whole classroom. And after a period of time, he's like, you know what? I am going to get called in no matter what. He's always calling on me. I better start studying. I'm not going to act like a fool and not know the answer. So he started studying every single day. And then by the time the end of the semester, he got an A. Well, he was given a new title, a new label, a new identity, and he lived up to it. And so you can think of that example of the lady with the temper, getting upset at any kind of criticism. She lived up to that and acted in a not so smart way. The other gentleman was given the title, you are an A student, and got an A out of the class so he could stay on the football team. So you think about it, we live up to those labels. And I think there's a way to kind of choose our labels if we want to and reframe and come up with new dialogue in our head.
Yeah. Even if you started calling yourself, so I'm an expert. I'm an expert at magic markers. See this magic marker? I am the expert.
Yeah.
I know the different varieties of them, the tips, depending on what you want. I would imagine if I started saying that, after a point in time, I would start believing it and then buying into it, and then eventually become a marker expert if that was my passion.
Yeah, exactly. I have a silly analogy, but I'm going to use it. We're going to come up with a new diagnosis and say, hey, Steve, you know what? We're going to call you flying impaired. Okay. And you know what? Let's say there's a mountain between you and I. In order for to get here, you need to flap your arms and come over and visit me. I'm going to say, hey, you know what? For the next 20 years, we're going to talk about how this impairs you, how you can't flap your arms like a bird, you can't get over the mountain. And we talk about it. We have coaching. We talk about how this is burdensome. After a period of time, you're going to develop a complex. Oh, I'm flying impaired. But let's say, when we look at a diagnosis, we look at a label, or we hear the internal dialogue, we forget what we can do. Well, maybe I can get into a helicopter and fly over. Maybe I can get into a plane. Maybe I can get in a car and drive around. Maybe for some of us, I can only climb over the mountain. Maybe I can only crawl, but at least I can crawl. And so we forget those abilities we have by focusing on what we can't do or what we have. I mean, how do you like to get a label of what you can't have or what you can't do? And so how stupid it would be for me to give you that label, you're flying impaired. Yeah, diagnoses are important, but it's a starting point. It's a beginning point of saying, okay, maybe this is what I struggle with. Now look at the solutions and let's change that and find out, hey, you know what? Maybe I want to be, a magic marker, guru. And so one of the things I always try to challenge people to do is shifting from outcome goals to identity goals. And if you, in the words of James Clear, he talks about how, you instead of focusing on what you want to become, identify with what you want to become. And here's an example. Let's say I am a smoker and I want to quit smoking. You know what? If I meet up with you and you say, hey, Eric, would you like a cigarette? I'm like, no, I'm trying to quit. In that very moment, I'm still identifying with being a smoker. But if we change the narrative and say, hey, we meet up again in that same scenario and I say, or you ask me, hey, would you like a cigarette? I'm like, no, thank you. I'm not a smoker. In that moment, I changed my identity. Even if it was 2 minutes ago, even if it was just yesterday, I'm no longer a smoker. What does a non-smoker do? Well, maybe they do other activities, or I want more motivation. What does the motivation person do? Can I do little tiny steps to get to that end goal? And the idea of the 2-minute rule. Can I do something for 2 minutes? That's easy. If I want to be, let's say I'm a healthy person, I'm going to work out 3 days a week for 3 hours during the week. Well, that's too hard. What if I walked into the gym and took 2 minutes and walked out? That sounds silly. That sounds stupid, but that's super easy. After a period of time, I'm going in there every day for 2 minutes. I walk out, set the timer. Maybe I could do 2 minutes more. Maybe I could do 2 minutes more. And after a while, I'm on the treadmill for 5 minutes. And well, I'm here. Why don't I stay for another 15? And after a period of time, maybe I'm getting to that full hour. And so that's that tiny little micro steps going towards that degree of that boiling point or that melting point. It's, maybe you're only 1 degree off. And if we identify with what we want to become, and then think about what does that person do to become that, then we start thinking of those little tiny micro steps and use that 2-minute rule to start something. Then we might be able to change our labels or who we identify with or what we want to identify with.
And to your point, at the gym, there's a huge sign on the wall and it says the only bad workout is the one that didn't take place.
Yeah.
Just getting there, just starting it. And it also seems that the story we tell ourselves is the one that we believe. So why tell yourself certain stories that may not be true. Like you may
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
right?
Well, we do it all the time. Oh, I'm always late. I can never be on time. Oh, I'm such a bad speller.
Right.
We constantly use these labels, these terms that we identify with, but it's like, oh wait, I am a good speller. And I can write. Well, I just use spell check because I want to double check. I use Grammarly or whatever you want to do to improve. That you identify with that, and you can live up to that label and become that. And I've heard this before. It's not so much what we know; it's what are you becoming. And in that journey, if I'm becoming that, am I already kind of there, even in a small degree? Have I already started that? It's like, hey, you know what? I like talking to people and helping them with their challenges. Well, I identified with that long before I got my licensure and got my degree. And so that every day, like I like helping people, like to talk to people, like to problem solve. Okay, you know what? Maybe I had that skill set in a small degree before I had my degree.
But that was the seed planted. You told yourself that story. I love helping people. I love talking to people. And then that seed started growing. If you didn't tell yourself that, if you said, I can't stand talking to people, or always, everybody wants something, you would not be doing what you're doing now.
Right. And so if we look at those things, if you look at the stage of behavior change, and there's like what they call the pre-contemplation stage where I don't see I have the problem. You're the problem with my drinking. It's not me. I can drink all I want. The contemplation stage of change is I'm aware of the problem and the desire to change that behavior. We sometimes get stuck. There's other stages: preparation, action, maintenance, and we don't have time to talk about those. But when we're in the contemplation stage, there's a thing that happens called ambivalence. Or it's the presence of competing motivation for and against change. And I often think of like cartoons. What was it? The Emperor's New Groove, where there's a character that has the little angel and a little devil on your shoulder, and he's arguing what you're supposed to do. Where you have the argument for change and the argument against change. And you think about that, that's those actually psychological terms where you're concepts where you have that internal dialogue of, can I make these changes within myself? And when you're in that ambivalent state, you see both arguments. And so it's like, I want to change, but I don't know how I can change. I go to my doctor and the doctor says, hey, Eric, you need to lose weight and stop eating chocolate cake. Okay. Then I go to a birthday party and there's chocolate cake there. Oh, I want to eat it. It looks so good. Oh, but I hear the doctor say, oh, I probably shouldn't. And so you need to change, but you don't know if you can. And so there's a challenge in that. But if you're ambivalent, you're one step closer to changing. And so you want that discomfort that causes you to think, okay, which one's going to win out? What argument am I going to appeal to? And I want to talk about how sometimes when we're trying to make changes or other people are helping us or helping others, we make a mistake and we appeal for the argument against change versus change. And I'll explain that in a second.
I have something that popped up in my head, and I'm curious how you might see it. Internal dialogue, right? That's what we're talking about, hearing that voice. How do you know? And this is a slight digression, but it's in my head. I got to ask.
Yeah.
How do you know the difference between the dialogue and your intuition? Maybe your intuition is trying to tell you something.
Right.
The dialogue is trying to tell you something. Could be the same situation or not.
Right. Yeah.
Is there a way to know the difference?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, in those quiet moments where you have time to think and you're like, it's an aha moment or a light bulb, you feel something passionate about it, like, oh, I have a new concept that popped in my head. Or, I talk about like paradigms and paradigm shifting. A paradigm is our thought process, our worldview. And when I get a different thought that pops in and it goes, oh, I didn't think of that before. You get a strong emotion that tells you, hey, this feels good. But a lot of times when we have that internal dialogue, it's like, oh, I'm not measuring up. It's those insecurities, those challenges, the fears that I talked about that we've developed over a lifetime from constant negative experiences. And so you can kind of see that it's more distressing when we see that. We can feel more like, that's a neat thought, and you get more of a positive experience. And so you can kind of tell that way, maybe not the most scientific way, but that's, what I see happening.
Mm-hmm. And I guess it really comes down to the intention of listening. A lot of times the inner voice will say something and you just go with it. Yeah, I can't do
Yeah.
that. I just no way I can do that. No. And you just go with it as opposed to processing it and thinking, is that really valid? What's coming up
Yeah.
in my mind, right?
So what's fascinating is there's a term I'll get you familiar with here. It's called deriding reflux. It's the natural desire of the helper or helping ourselves to set things right, to prevent harm and promote the wellness in others or ourselves. The problem with that is the belief that you must convince or persuade the person to do the right thing. Most often feelings arise where you might get angry with yourself or defensive, uncomfortable. You feel ashamed because, you feel powerless. It's more like, oh, you should be doing this. You should be doing that. Well, we already know because we have that ambivalence. We already have the argument for and against change. If we think about it, it's like, oh, I already know what I'm supposed to do. But if you tell me what to do, I'm automatically going to switch to the counter argument for against change. So if you try to convince me to stop eating chocolate cake, I'm like, but it's so delicious. It's only one piece. So I'm going to go to that automatically. And so that's what happens in that internal dialogue. Or when someone's trying to help us, we're trying to help other people change. We make that mistake with automatically going to, well, you know what you should do. Here, this is what you should do. And you're like, well, here's my argument why that won't work. And so what you need to do is do what I call change talk and scaling motivation that helps you kind of appeal to the argument for change. And that's really about asking the why question. Why do you want to change? Why, what is it that you want to see different? I mean, do you like good health? Yeah, I love good health. I want to be here for my kids and not die of a heart attack when they're, teenagers or when they're having their own kids. And I want to be healthy. Or what 3 best reasons for you to do this and how important this would be for you? And so you're appealing to that argument for change, and that can actually help with that motivation to want to move forward with that. And to illustrate that point, a lot of times when we are looking to ask that question, where are you at on what you want to be? A lot of times when we're in the ambivalent stage, we've moved so far to on the scale of 0 when things have been at their worst, 10 that miracle we want or that change we want. And so we think, okay, where am I at on that scale of motivation or reaching my goals? Maybe I'm a 3 or a 4. But reality says, hey, I suck. I can't believe I'm so low. But really, you're almost halfway to your miracle. You've gone this far. Now you're hitting a wall. That means you've done some things right. Mm-hmm. That means, it's like, okay, you're now asking for help. You're trying to fix yourself. You're trying to help others. And so when you use change talk and scaling motivation, and this is scratching the surface of what I do because it goes a lot deeper, but you feel more engaged, empowered, open, understood when you appeal for why they want to change and kind of go from there. There's a quote that I like to share with you. And I call it the paradox. When people experience themselves as unacceptable, they are immobilized. Their ability to change is diminished or blocked when, on the other hand, when people experience being accepted as they are, they're free to change. You think about it, wait, if I'm accepting of who I am right now, then why would I need a change? And so there is a concept of how do we become accepting of ourselves in our moment of imperfection and still want to change. And that can be a challenge, but there is a way to kind of do that.
And we'll press the pause button there because we're just about out of time. Thank you for all of this today. And this is the stuff that we deal with all the time. I want to just say, spot on with everything. And one thing you said at the very beginning resonated with me in terms of the inner child. Yeah. I did hypnotherapy a couple of years ago, confronted myself as a child and reassured myself. I was almost like I was looking at myself as an adult to a child. I got you. I got your back. You'll never be alone. I'll always be there for you. I addressed that child within. It was a game changer. I mean, it's just, that's why I asked you, that voice we hear all the time is that the child? And that it is. Yeah.
Finding that acceptance and compassion, ask the question, what happened to me, not what's wrong with me. Or when we're dealing with other people, what's wrong with you, man? No, what happened to you? What caused you to get this way? And what are your challenges? And that humanizes the situation and realize, hey, we all have struggles. But can we have a little self-compassion and understand that we're human and there is a pathway to change and we can appeal to that, and then let's go to work.
How do we work with you?
Yeah, so you can reach me at 779-212-4721. You can reach me on my website at imcsolutionsllc.com. I have a way to connect me on there and reach out. Love to hear from you.
Eric, always great having you on. I will be sharing most of this with everybody I know. I'm not even kidding. Had a conversation about fear last night with some friends. We were actually talking about that, and I never knew what you said earlier about the 2 fears that we're pretty much born with. The rest we're learned. Fantastic.
They
Thank
can
you.
be unlearned.
It can be a most important point. And with your help, thank you so much for today. Appreciate it.
Yes.
We'll be right back.
This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.